No way, he just said this. We have a ridiculous Steelers update as a former Pittsburgh Steeler gives his take on his trade out of Pittsburgh. My name is Peyton Kleppy, and on today's episode of Steelers Digest, we'll be breaking down the latest Pittsburgh Steelers reports and analysis regarding the Pittsburgh Steelers football team. As the Pittsburgh Steelers have recently traded away George Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys, he gives his take on the situation. Before we get into the latest news, if you guys are not already currently subscribed to the channel, just click that subscribe button down below. Only 9% of our current viewers are actually currently subscribed to the channel. So if you click that subscribe button, we will get you guys the latest Pittsburgh Steelers reports and analysis every single day. Let's get right into it. We got a lot of news to talk about. So like I said before, the Pittsburgh Steelers did indeed trade away George Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys after, some up and down years in Pittsburgh. We did draft this guy in the 2022 season. We brought him in the second round with quarterback Kenny Pickett as well as Calvin Austin in the third round coming out of Memphis. This guy did play at Georgia, was a Bulldog, and, he did play very well for us in his 3 years in Pittsburgh, but the big thing with this guy was his personality and how he dealt with hardships and adversity. Obviously, this guy was a productive player, but when you're pouting all the time and you're making dumb comments, you're complaining, your dad's even complaining about you and your quarterback, it's never a good look, and nobody wants any of that BS around their team. Nobody wants another storyline to add to their roster. The good thing about Super Bowl championship teams is they never have one guy that's really like complaining or becoming just a drama queen for the team. So unfortunately for George Pickens, he did get a one-way ticket to the Dallas Cowboys, Jerry World, and I don't think he's going to have too much overall success there. He might have some individual success, have a few good seasons, but I don't think the Dallas Cowboys are going anywhere. They just announced that they will be playing the Philadelphia Eagles on their first matchup of the year, and I do have the Philadelphia Eagles taking them down in that matchup. I don't think the Dallas Cowboys are a good team. They are a good team on paper, but, they just never can seem to put it together, and I really don't believe in Dak Prescott. They paid that guy a ton of money just to be average, so anyways, George Pickens did make some comments on the Pittsburgh Steelers. He did say on Twitter that the Pittsburgh Steelers were the cheapest organization, and he used some other colorful words that I cannot say on this podcast. If you want to check it out, you can, but he also said that the Pittsburgh Steelers will move on from the rest of the guys in the organization with throughout the upcoming years. So, this was not a surprising thing by George Pickens. Apparently, this trade was kind of a surprise. If we go back to the draft, there was some rumors that the Pittsburgh Steelers were looking to move on from George Pickens through the draft via trade, and there was some reports coming out, and obviously that's when George Pickens decided to unfollow the Steelers on Instagram, and from then, Omar probably just said, you know what, I'm done with this guy, let's just move on, and obviously Coach Tomlin was one of the vocal guys in the front office that said, hey, I'm done with this guy. We got to move on from him. And, as Coach Tomlin always says, we want volunteers, not hostages. And it seemed like George Pickens, at the end of his career in Pittsburgh was a hostage. So we just wanted to move on from him. I think it was both for best sides of the party. I really don't hold any animosity towards George Pickens. He's still a young guy. He's still only 23, 24 years old. So he's still got a lot to learn and a lot to grow. He's still got to mature and show that he is a man. He still acts like a kid, but he is a grown man, and he's getting paid millions of dollars to play a game, So hopefully this guy can finally realize how blessed he is, how much of a great opportunity this guy has in the National Football League, and especially at the wide receiver position. This is a position that there's a lot of ups and downs throughout most wide receivers' careers, and it is very hard to find that consistency at that NFL level. There's a lot of different factors that go into that. Obviously, with the quarterback position, it really depends on who's throwing you the ball. And with George Pickens in Pittsburgh, unfortunately for him, he had a lot of ups and downs. We had a lot of different guys in that quarterback room. Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. We had a lot of different guys that were throwing this guy the football, so it's definitely frustrating and tough as a receiver to try to get that chemistry with a quarterback when they're changing them out every single year. So that is one side that I will give to George Pickens, and I do understand that, it is definitely frustrating when there is a lot of ups and downs and the frustrating in rebuilding, because the Pittsburgh Steelers have definitely been rebuilding these past couple years, and that is why they have not had a primary number one quarterback or really a number one receiver in their offense. George Pickens was primarily the number one receiver, but earlier on in his career, there was Deontay Johnson that was also in Pittsburgh, and he was our number one receiver before Pickens. So, when they were both together, they were already beefing about who needs to get the ball more, and the Pittsburgh Steelers moved on from both of them. It's crazy looking back. Only a few years ago, we had Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, a pretty stacked wide receiver room. And within 2 or 3 years, both those guys have talked their way out of Pittsburgh. It is a crazy thing to think about, but, I do think the Pittsburgh Steelers did make a great move in trading away the George Pickens. I'd rather get some compensation for him than, just letting him play out another year of his contract, letting him cause more issues for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just get some compensation for him while you can and move on. This really reminds me of the Antonio Brown situation, where Antonio Brown obviously didn't want to play in Pittsburgh anymore. The Pittsburgh Steelers obviously were done with dealing with all his mishaps and idiotic things. So, they decided to trade him away to the Las Vegas Raiders for, guess what? A 3rd-round pick and a 5th-round pick. And guess what we traded George Pickens away for? A 3rd-round pick and a conditional, I believe, 5th or 6th-round pick. If not, correct me in the comments below. But, it's pretty similar compensation, pretty similar type of player, super talented player, but just hard to manage off the field, hard to coach. So, Coach Tomlin, he might only have a few more years in Pittsburgh, really depending on how successful the rest of his career will end up. And, it also depends on what kind of leash owner Rooney's got Mike Tomlin on. The past 10 years have felt like the Groundhog's Day. It's been the same thing every single year. We start off hot, late season collapse, or either or. We start off pretty bad, and then we have a late season resurgence, but then we just can't do anything in the playoffs. So it really depends on all of these factors, but I'm very happy that Pittsburgh Steelers did indeed get some compensation for George Pickens, because moving into next year, we're definitely going to have to look for our next franchise quarterback. If a guy like Will Howard or a guy like Mason Rudolph doesn't step up and have a great season this year, I think we're going to be looking for a long-term answer. So it is great to have some picks in the bag already. We will be receiving also some compensatory picks for players like Russell Wilson, Najee Harris, Justin Fields, Dante Jackson, and all those other guys who left in free agency. So the Pittsburgh Steelers will have a nice little haul of picks going into next year. I believe we're sitting at 12 at the moment, so we're looking good in that stage. So that is all I have for you guys today on Steelers Digest. If you guys are not already currently subscribed, click that subscribe button down below. Thank you so much. Here we go, Steelers. Peace out, boys.